Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a detailed AAR for the Sultanate of Delhi. We have early access to the game, but we can't show videos, so this is why we're doing AAR format. And this nation has some really interesting situations, or is a really interesting start, and plays quite a bit different than others, at least in the opening salvo, which is mostly what we're going to be covering. First of all, it is absolutely enormous. You can see here there's an enormous amount of pops. They have 43 million pops at game start, roughly speaking, and they also have almost entirely not their religion. They are Sunni, and they have Hindu pops. So this is a big part of their start. They also start out with 100 inflation, which is incredibly rough. They have some really strong advantages, which we'll get into. But the biggest kind of characteristic is the disaster, the fall of Delhi, which you have to be able to navigate. This is a reason why we had, generally speaking, a lot of trouble a couple times where we started Sultanate of Delhi before we both knew how Sultanate of Delhi kind of worked by losing a few starts, but also having a better idea of how to play the game and what's important, this type of stuff. And we came up with a strategy for a successful start. Although the strategy probably can be improved upon, the general idea I do think is going to be good. And so we are going to be getting into that today, and we are going to be going in quite a bit of depth and talking about things. And so let's jump in. Let's start by talking about kind of our situation on the map. We are, of course, in India. I do think that this is probably the strongest region play in the entire game. Just geographically speaking, the combination of pops and also having access to good resources and institutions, I think, just generally speaking, will make India very strong. To speak kind of broad strokes about the continent here, if we kind of scroll down a little, we will see that the climate is going to be differentiated: subtropical, tropical, and arid. Arid in particular is kind of medium bad, tropical is kind of bad, subtropical is excellent, and this is going to allow you to house a lot of pops, specifically once you start getting down into this region that is kind of here. And then also you're going to have a good amount of pops here, but really this is the brunt of where the very most pops are in India, and so this is kind of where the strongest power base is. I think, just generally speaking, an enormous percentage of our pops are just in kind of this ring here. There's Delhi up here, the major city. Our capital starts here, and then there are two market capitals, one here and one here, which we will see in just a second. Coming in and looking at the terrain, it is relatively flat, so that's good for projecting control, but we are going to be having, you know, a little bit of difficulties as it relates to the vegetation, which is very dense, and this is going to, in my opinion, really kind of color the way that you look at the entire continent quite a bit, because we are pretty set on, you know, the terrain. Admittedly, plateau and hills are a little bit rough. As it relates to just India in general, the hills on the kind of coast are a little bit annoying, because you can either post up like in the middle. If you're playing in southern India, you can post up in the middle and be able to project control around the flat area pretty well, or you can post up along the coast, in which case you can benefit from maritime, but then you have a difficult time pushing it into the middle of your country here. So that is going to be the way you're looking at it in the south, but in the north, you're just generally wanting to be kind of in the middle of this scrum and taking a look at things for the vegetation. You can kind of see where the veins will be for projecting control. Where we start with our capital up here in Delhi, we will eventually be able to push control down this way, and we will be able to push control along a river this way and up this way. Also, the farmlands really make it so that this place supports a lot of pops, the farmlands and grasslands specifically, and so again, you're seeing this kind of a circle here, or oval shape, being really the brunt of where the pops are, and also where your control is. You're very nicely located, just in the grand scheme of things, with Delhi as it relates to India. I think that you could probably play India in maybe one of three ways, with one of those ways being not so good. The not so good way would be to have the capital somewhere over here. I don't know exactly where. A big reason why I think this is not so good is because the stuff that is in kind of the region to the west of us in the Middle East and also in Persia is not very good, not very accessible with maritime, and so I don't think that that's that strong. You could also be here in India here, kind of in the central area, which I think will probably give you the most overall control, although you will have a hard time getting control down to the south. Once the naval control is nerfed, this is going to be, I think, kind of the best place, and I think the second best place is going to be down here, where you can push control into central India here, and then in order to get control up here, you can either come through here, or you can go through here. I imagine the former will be a little bit faster, coming in along the river. There's a couple of veins in here that are going to be relatively good, but there's a massive river complex up here, and most of the pops are up here, and you can kind of think of it in a couple different ways. You can think of it in terms of how many locations are we getting in under our control, or you can think of it as how much pop are we getting under our control. And for India, like, half the pop is in like this circle here. And so because there's so much pops are up here, you really get a lot of control where you have a lot of pops if you are kind of centered in the north, which is one of the reasons why I think the north's the best, and this is where Delhi's capital starts. And so that is going to be good for us kind of on a macro sense. Something that's also worth mentioning is development, because northern India starts out with a ton of it, which means you are going to be really good for building up a massive economy in northern India. Development affects a lot of factors. We do have a little bit of a pause screen from one of our videos where we showed it, but it affects max RGO size, supporting building levels, building costs, migration attraction, population capacity, which is important because population drives the max building size that you can have, food production, supply limit, institution growth, market attraction, and construction speed here, but also, very, very importantly, distance cost capital, proximity cost reduction. So as long as proximity cost reduction is operating in a discount sort of way rather than an efficiency sort of way, the more development you have, the more valuable more development is. Because the way that reduction modifiers work is the 25% you reduce first, that reduces by 25%. The next 25% reduction will reduce by 33% relative to what you had before, because you're on 0.75, you get reduced by 0.25, that's down to 0.5, or 33% of the additional levels, and then the subsequent 25% is half off, right? Increasing returns on development. So, as it relates to India, Dev Province is going to be very powerful in India in the north on these already high development provinces, and you want to have your capital where you have high development, because this means that the proximity cost reduction, the effect of it, will be borne on the most locations possible downstream, because you are getting the reductions at the front end. If you get the reductions on the back end, everything in between isn't cheaper, but when you get a reduction in cost, since the cost of proximity links like a chain, it will reduce every single link downstream. And so we did use some Dev Province action, kind of valuing it a little bit higher than we otherwise normally would, by virtue of us starting with really high development. I think if you start with like 20-ish development, then the action is not that powerful if you have a province that's 4 to 5 locations. But if you start with someplace that's 35 or high 30s or mid 30s, which we do in the case up here, then it can be quite worth it. This little green spot is where the capital is at Game Start. This up here is Delhi, which is the market capital. Let's take a quick look at the markets. Alright, here are the markets in the region. We are in control of Delhi, Varanasi, and Kambat. The Kambat market in particular is going to be one of the most important markets for the Open, because the Kambat market is actually capable of reaching either Oman or Mecca, depending on where you are with trade range, which is going to be critical for grabbing institutions. The only reason we can grab institutions as Delhi is because of this market here. Otherwise, we would get really a lot further behind, and this is the advantage that I think that India just generally has over China. They have similar number of pops, but India is going to be getting the institutions way earlier, and a lot of institutions are hard locked to spawn in the old world specifically, and so the second and third age institutions, I think in particular, China's going to be behind on, and China might have to eat bad research, this type of thing, but India doesn't have to. And so this is going to be a factor, and is largely due to the importance of this market here, or if you're in the south, this market down here. is also going to be an important factor as well. The point being is they both are just barely in range of Mecca/Oman, which is in range of the Mamluks, who generally get institutions pretty quickly. Another thing is just kind of coming in on the resources. The resources in India are just absolutely incredible. Focusing kind of on the north, because that's where the brunt of what we have in the Sultanate of Delhi is, we do have an enormous amount of elephants, which are enormous. They have base cost of 10, and so these will be very valuable, and you turn them into ivory, then you have ivory, but you also have the tax base from the elephants, really quite powerful. You have a bunch of silk, you have sugar, you have cotton. All of these are very good resources. You have a smattering of rice and wheat, which is really, really high food RGO, but then you have the sturdy grains, and sturdy grains are a little bit weird because consumption is different for different pop groups, and the pop groups in India seem to really like sturdy grains, or at least in northern India, and so they eat a lot of sturdy grains. And so while sturdy grains, rice gives 10 food per RGO, wheat gives 8 food for RGO, sturdy grains, if I'm not mistaken, give 5, same with legumes. But you might even want to not build over all your sturdy grains, and by that I mean urbanize. In particular, India has enormous population, so you're going to be urbanizing more than normal because you have a lot of things also at the pop limit. Specifically, at this kind of break where this arid starts, you're actually going to have an enormous amount of overpopulation because there's a ton of pop there, and so you will get 0 pop growth when that's happening. You will get, I think, fewer promotions, more demotions, and pops will try and leave. And so this is a bit of a feature of kind of our start, but we are going to be having, so you're going to want to promote more aggressively over here, but the main idea is we have really, really great resources in the north, probably not as good as the south. In the south, there's like 18 pepper right here, which is one of the most valuable resources, and there's a gold pile, there's a couple silver piles up in the north, but overall the south is even more resource dense. It has fewer elephants, but all that pepper is just incredibly valuable. It's kind of in rough terrain-ish locations that make it hard to get market access to all the pepper, so you might not get as much tax base from the pepper as you would like, but by trading the pepper, you can really get a lot of value. We didn't really sink our teeth into, you know, the south. We didn't put our mitts in their oven, so we didn't quite get all the value off this at where we are with the Delhi campaign now, but just to talk about India resources in general, the south is probably a little bit better. Alright, so let's talk about the opener. For starters, we have that 100 inflation, and most starts, you kind of spend all your money, or most of your money, and I think with Sultanate of Delhi, you just hang on to about 80% of it, and only really invest in really, really juicy things, and the reason for this is twofold. One, your money's effectively less valuable. It's half as valuable at putting investment into stuff as other countries because of your enormous inflation, and we don't do any minting, and we look to get it down over the course of the run. But secondarily, the disaster you're about to run through involves quite a bit of pain, and income is a little bit hard for you to achieve at Delhi at start, so I think you want to save a big chunk of that money as buffer. The few things we do spend on, I think, are a little bit of roads around the capital, specifically connecting the capital, which starts right here, to Delhi, which is in the north, which is the market center, and also building a few silver mines over here. We tried to build bailiffs there a little bit later, but the bailiffs could not employ up because they were 100% slaves there, so they couldn't promote the required profession to be able to employ the bailiffs. So that was a little bit of an amusing thing. We did put in a support ticket for that, but also, generally speaking, building roads upstream is going to be better than building roads downstream. The reason being is we're basically on this massive pile of rivers. The rivers, when going downstream as it relates to control, will give 30 proximity reduction, 30 flat, but the road gives 20 flat reduction. So if you build a road downstream along a river, it doesn't do anything except for allow you to build a bridge, which bridges are good, but they're not as valuable as roads going upstream. So we're generally going to prefer to build roads upstream. And the other big characteristic of our start is we release a huge chunk of our territory as subjects. I think we released a little bit too much a chunk, and this made loyalty, playing around the loyalty, a little bit difficult. And so adjustments, I think, can really be made here. But we release all of this down here because when we pop the disaster, the fall of Delhi, and we wait until the disaster pops before doing this. We wait until the disaster pops because it gives us -50 relations with all of our subjects. Once the disaster pops, then we release the subjects. But we release this down here so that we don't have to deal with Bahmani. Bahmani normally would force get released out. We would have to fight them to bring them back in. I think these fights are doable, but we release them out so we don't have to fight them. And also, we're never going to get that much control down here anyways, or it's going to be a really long time, especially if we can't employ up bailiffs. And so it would negatively affect our crown power by a lot. Your crown power is an aggregate of all your locations. And so when you have a bunch of locations with 0 control, this pulls down your crown power. It gives you the negative crown power malus, which negatively affects your tax efficiency, which is really, really bad. And so this makes it really hard to make money. And so this is why we do the release. It's a big driver of it is avoiding the Bahmani thing, but another big driver of it is making the crown power much better. Is France, we open with releasing countries as well with our start that we had done as France. We also release another big subject up here. We don't really release too many, but also India has a unique subject type. They don't have vassals. They have a Samantas, or something like this. I forget the exact name. I apologize if I got it wrong, which is a little bit interesting. And they have like 3 different tiers of it. But the problem with all of these is their loyalty is just absolutely jank. It's like impossible to get them loyal. So at some point, we're probably going to end up releasing and then annexing them down the line. But that's these guys down here. That's this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, these guys over here. Okay, so we release these enormous guys out of here, and then what we do is we mass delete forts. We delete every fort except for the one in the capital. A big reason for this is just the cost of the forts is pretty high, and we just don't want to pay the cost. But also, a big part of it is we're going to have to fight people who are getting released out from us as part of our disaster, and if they don't have forts, it's way, way easier to do that. And so we release all that so that we don't have to do this. And so another thing that we do is we shutter all of our Mamluk barracks. We stop paying the upkeep cost, and we delete an enormous amount of our army. I think we kept the heavy cavalry or something like this, but this might have even been a mistake, or maybe we kept too many units of the heavy cavalry. I think we maybe kept 1 barracks on the capital open, but I think it's worth talking about the Mamluk barracks, because this is a really important characteristic, and I think that this is a huge reason why Delhi is one of the strongest starts in the game from a multiplayer perspective, and that is that you don't really have that much access to manpower. Let's in fact see if we can pull up the barracks. Okay, it doesn't look like there is a public image for the armory, which is the first manpower building you get, but that only gives 10 manpower. And the Mamluk Barracks gives 25. The Mamluk Barracks is going to have a more expensive upkeep, and it specifically is going to have an upkeep in slaves. But a big distinction is there's an upper limit to how much manpower you can get. It's driven by how many buildings you can build, which is informed by population. And also just this kind of population factor multiplied times the manpower buildings you have. Everyone will have access to, very early on, the sergeantry, which gives a trickle of manpower, gives 5, but then they research into the professional armies, and they get armories, which gives 10. The Mamluk Barracks gives 2.5 times that amount, and also, Delhi can simply build armories as well. And so, just based on the amount of barracks it has accessible to it, it's going to have, 3.5 times the amount of manpower that another nation would in the early ages before you get access to more manpower buildings and higher tier manpower buildings. But not only that, it has an enormous population. And so as a result of this, they just have the absolute most manpower in the game for like the first 3 ages if you want to push things pretty aggressively. It is really expensive to run these manpower buildings, so this will be a factor, but eventually I think in multiplayer, you're not going to be throttled by the money so much as you are going to be throttled by your ability to saturate manpower buildings, and you just have this huge extra one. Yes, it costs 500 ducats, but when the money is not the factor and the manpower is a factor, this is going to be a really, really powerful and key building for Delhi. At the open for our estates, we are going to trickle out estate privileges because we cannot lower legitimacy too much. we use our 2 cabinet actions to stabilize the country and to increase legitimacy, so we will be getting ticking legitimacy and ticking stability. But also, a very important characteristic is our dhimmi is a huge estate and is much more powerful than they are in this version of the government setup that we have in this screenshot here. The crown is a lot weaker than 18%, which is one of the reasons why, again, we release subjects, and the dhimmi is like 50 or 60% power, maybe even 70%. Really a huge chunk of the power, and basically all of the tax base is going to the dhimmi. There's virtually no tax base to the commoners, so we zero tax the commoners, we zero tax the ulema, we tax the burghers, the dhimmi, and the umara. The dhimmi for us are renamed zimmi, but we are just looking to trickle privileges to the dhimmi at game start, slowly, not interfering with the satisfaction too much of people or our legitimacy, because every time you give out an institution, it negatively affects it. But the idea is we're trying to raise our equilibrium satisfaction for the dhimmi, which allows us to tax the dhimmi more, because almost all of the money that we have is going to be going to the dhimmi. We also get some events related to Ibn Battuta, or some sort of event chain. You have options, you can choose where he goes to explore, and then he brings back various bonuses based on where he explores. I don't know all the various branches that this can go, and if the explorations can be successful or not. I know that as Mali, we received Ibn Battuta as an explorer, as we also did as the Mamluks, so I know this affects who actually receives and gets the events of him incoming, but we do see these events kind of scattered throughout the play as he both leaves and comes back, and so that is an interesting feature. But we are also still focused on and still trying to give out privileges in a way that makes a lot of sense, and so the next up after we kind of given out a lot of dhimmi ones are going to be the burghers, or kind of tied in with them. We're trying to trickle them out to avoid getting the legitimacy too low, which is also why the cabinet action for legitimacy, I actually think in the opening salvo of the game it's pretty good, just in the first maybe 1 to 5 years, something like this, maybe 1 to 10 years, because it allows you to give out your privileges faster that you want to give out without running into really low legitimacy. But for the burghers, we have 2 privileges to focus on. The first is a 10% tax efficiency, which is available to everyone, but the second is going to be 10% max tax for burghers, which is really strong, but this is tied to us being Muslim, which is why we don't want to be switching off of it onto Hindu. In our first parliament, we get to balance the budget debate, which is really good for us because it gives us an enormous, while the debate is going on, it gives us, I think, minus 0.5 to inflation. This is really big, brings down inflation quite a bit. You can roll this parliament if and only if you have some amount of inflation. So in theory, as any nation, you probably want to be running just a very small amount of inflation just so you can run it, because when you can run it, you just can increase the minting to absolutely max, and it's a pretty good one for generating money. At the end of the parliament, if you're successful, which I don't think we were, you get like -2 inflation, which is also a big deal, and this is going to be one that we really want to be just generally rolling as Delhi. Now, we didn't get to the point of the game where this would be useful for us, which is after we have converted an enormous amount of Hindus, and that's the Talukdar nobility government reform, which we are in on, which gives the Talukdar tax collection. Now, this in-game gives noble satisfaction instead of peasant satisfaction, so it's not quite the same, but what this is giving you is max tax for peasants and maximum tax for peasants' estate. Now, we see that it takes a 730 days to fully implement. That was on the previous version of the game where cabinet actions did not instantly implement, but this should be in immediately, and it is affected by cabinet efficiency. So this is not plus 15% max tax. It's like plus 40, which is enormous. The reason we're not using it at game start is that peasants, you only have peasants if they're of your religion. Otherwise, if you're Muslim, they'll be dhimmi. And so we just have only dhimmi. And so we won't really get anything from taxing the peasants, and so we're not taxing the peasants. We're actually doing zero tax on them at the opener because of the way the religion works and the fact that we don't really have anyone to tax, and we would rather just have the estate bonus instead of of getting like a little amount of tax. And this also is just an awkward situation for Delhi, like in terms of the game, because as we're slowly converting pops, it's starting to get more and more encouraging us to tax them, but also we're getting less and less money from the Dhimmi estate that we're taxing. So it's actually kind of an awkward situation as you convert people, but eventually we would be using this cabinet action to get us up to like 80 or 90% peasant tax. We would probably actually just get up to 100% peasant max tax, and then have minimum tax of like 40%. And we'd tax them to whatever satisfaction is applicable. If there was a peasant estate satisfaction, that would be absolutely insane. But now this is noble estate satisfaction equilibrium. But that's still plenty good, because it's often pretty hard to get really high satisfaction on the nobles. And this will allow you to tax them max without them getting upset. You won't have as many noble revolts. 25% satisfaction on the nobles is still pretty strong. But this is something worth mentioning that did not come into play in our run. So we get an event that I thought was worth noting when our Sultan dies that gives us a building that gives plus 10 max control. Max control is an incredibly strong modifier, but this is only in one location. But if you accumulate these over the course of the game, maybe you get 10, 15 locations total that are getting plus 10 control. That might be decent value over the course of the game. It's a really strong modifier. But then we get the Darkest Hour event, and this gives minus 50 satisfaction. So at this point, we're like, okay, we haven't really been playing that long. We're going to restart the run because the subjects we released, we don't want them to have minus 50 loyalty. And so what we do is we release them after the Darkest Hour event, which kind of heralds for us the fall of Delhi's situation, which is going to be a big deal. So we're restarted, and then we're back to the fall of Delhi. Unfortunately, we don't get the parliament roll for the thing that reduces inflation, but it is what it is. The second time around, though, we did spend less money, and we decided to save. Instead of saying around 4k, we save 8k, and so this is going to be an interesting one. Also, we try to use increased control in this location to get the buildings to employ up. A lack of control gives a very negative malus to your pop promotion speed, equal to the lack of control. So if you have 0 control, it's minus 100% pop promotion speed, so you actually won't promote pops unless you have a positive modifier from somewhere else. So we try and increase control, we try and get in the loud car outside, but we didn't know that the issue was they're 100% slaves and they can't promote 2 soldiers at all, and that was the issue. But this is something that you can do. The increased province control, it also affects your conversion rate. So something that we might end up doing is increasing province control if we want to convert a very specific province, because if we increase control, your conversion speed is manipulated by the exact same negative modifier, where if you have 50 control, you'll get minus 50% conversion speed. So this will be a pretty big factor for you. So in our parliament that we get this time, instead of the one for the reduction in inflation, we get gravel road law. So or gravel roads, which we spend a little bit on gravel roads, not a whole ton, because we're looking to save money, but gravel roads or roads in general are really powerful, and we have a discount. And we change laws to use Jagier taxation, which is an ICTA, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it, law, which is tied to being Muslim. You only get the law group if you are Muslim, and this one gives you plus 20% tax efficiency. So all throughout, we actually have enormous tax efficiency. To the extent that we're not really able to generate taxes, a lot of it just has to do with kind of the strangeness between the Dhimmi and the peasants, the fact that you want to tax both of them, and as you are transitioning from Dhimmi to peasants and non-taxing peasants, you're actually going to be missing out on value that eventually you look to recoup later. The year is 1342, and we are only breaking even. This is going to be a common theme all throughout, is that the opening salvo, we don't really make money as a result of kind of all the negative things that are going on. I think the disaster as we had it might have even been broken, because I think it was supposed to give more negative satisfaction than it did, or we didn't understand it, or it was a decaying amount of satisfaction that was proportional. But as we got to the tail end of the event, we noticed our satisfaction was kind of just fine, and so at this point, we have 94 inflation when the fall of Delhi pops, and we release the subjects again. So, For our next parliament, we get send envoys. The important thing here isn't what that parliament does. I think it gives us extra envoys if we succeed in passing that debate, but we're not there for the debate. We're there because it is a nobles debate, which means its opening support is really, really high, and we want that support to do stuff like pass laws, and the law we choose to pass, I think we only get one through, is favor the wealthy. So we move off of, on our administrative structure, one that is giving us negative crown power and a little bit of a state satisfaction, I think, in exchange for one that gives burghers a satisfaction and burghers max tax. This is favor the wealthy. I do think it's the strongest one because it is max tax for burghers is one of the strongest modifiers in the game, because generally speaking, you can't generate enough peasant satisfaction to really push up peasant tax. Most of the taxes are on the peasants or the burghers, but you can generate a lot of burgher satisfaction via estate privileges, and so the max tax on that, I think, is a little bit more valuable. And just to kind of remind, we have another 10% from our estate privilege, so we have plus 20% max tax for burghers. After that, the Black Death, much like the loud car outside, rolls in, killing our pops, much like the loud car kills our sanity. And with this, we, instead of going, often we go expel the sick, so we can build this building that is called the Pest House. It gives, I think, minus 30% or plus 30% disease resistance, rather, and segregate infected just gives plus 15 disease resistance, but it doesn't require you build buildings. We're really poor, we can't afford the buildings, and so we just go for the flat disease resistance, and we kind of just take the fact that a bunch of our pops are going to die, but it's not that big a deal to us, because remember, up here in the northwest, we have a ton of overpopulated places, and that clears those out so they can start growing again, and so even though a lot of our pops die, that death is effectively not as painful because we were already pop capped in some locations anyways, and so now we unlock their ability to grow again, and we will hit pop cap again on all of these locations, and so it's not the biggest deal in the world to us that we're losing pops. Spreadsheet warning, if you have any kids present, throw them down the stairs, staple them to a tree, because obviously they're not allowed to look at the spreadsheet, but we have this, and these numbers aren't updated, but just to kind of give a bit of an idea, in this column, we have a place that's subtropical, grasslands, flatland, and the pop capacity here is 100,000, before we're including the fact that development gives you percentage pop capacity, but if we look at a place that's arid, sparse, and flatland, which we have arid, sparse area in the northwest, it's only 25,000, so this is really a big part of why we are overpopulated. Although these numbers aren't what the numbers are anymore, this relationship between the two, where it's a huge difference in terms of pop capacity, this is still present and an important factor, and is why we are over pop cap in some of our locations, but not in others. We also decide to go for the no censorship law, which is going to give a little bit more tolerance towards heathens and heretics. Again, we're stacking a lot of that because regular tolerance is almost useless for us because our percentage of our pops that are Sunni is like 5 or 6% at this point, and so it is really not a whole lot. Inflation is at 80%, and the fall of Delhi disaster, the situation regarding the share of power is we are at 8.4%, they are at 6.2%. It is headed by this guy down in the south, Saptagram, who is one of our subjects, and they are rebelling against us. And what we are doing with this, kind of the way it works, is we are sending out a bunch of envoys, we are demanding tribute, point governors. A lot of these cost gold, and this is what we're sinking our gold into when we're getting gold, and we're using this to improve the relationship of everyone here in India, and as you improve relations, you get more people supporting you, and as more people support you, your bar fills up faster. So in this instance, at this current juncture, we're at 8.4 versus 6.2, but we end up getting a lot of the support really at the tail end rather than kind of all throughout, and it feels really kind of backloaded, but a big part of that is us getting all of these guys liking us, but also part of this aspect is We're not really aggressive with the infamy / antagonism throughout this time period. We're not really declaring a lot of wars during this time period. We don't really need more land, and we don't have any land that we can take that we would have even remotely close to high control, other than these areas right here. But if we take these, we will upset everyone and hurt our ability to pass the fall of Delhi. And I think that it's not a degree to which we can go for, but some of these are pretty good. With send envoys, I think it gives an entire region plus relations at the cost of a couple envoys. Appoint governors, I think gives like max control to an area, which makes it so that it won't contribute to rebels as much. It was particularly strong. Appease the nobles, I think you just give money, but then you get higher satisfaction nobles, and it also gives you progress. Strengthen neighbor relations is the one where you just use a bunch of envoys. But you have a bunch of buttons to click, and we're clicking the buttons. Inflation is at 80%, and we are in positive stability for the first time. We get this coup from a historical character who I wish I wrote his name down with a little bit more legible kind of stuff. Why don't we see if we can find this guy in Wikipedia? So his name is Malik Makbul Tilangani, who is referred to sometimes as Khan-e-Jahan Makbul. I'm not sure I went for pronouncing two names, or both versions of the game, but he was an Indian commoner in the Kakatiya Empire who was converted to Islam and rose to become the wazir of the Delhi Sultanate under this gentleman here. He was appointed as governor of Hyderabad in the service of the Delhi Sultanate, and he ruled and governed the present lands in present-day Telangana on behalf of the Delhi Sultanate. He gets in charge. As a result of the coup, this is some of the flavor events. But coming back into what we are doing for our text, which we are going to update the text, what we are researching, in the order we're researching, and just briefly describe why. We go tolerance ideas first. There's going to be a few in between the opener and tolerance ideas, but we're just focusing on the texts that are really important to us. Tolerance ideas, of course, giving us that extra level of tolerance. We also go for the riches of Asia and Silk Road. Now, I'm forgetting which one is which on these, but they give trade efficiency and production efficiency, both really strong modifiers, and most of the countries in the East have this. Generally speaking, the Eastern cultures tend to have a slightly stronger tech tree, and this is an example of in which we are getting production efficiency and tax efficiency. Throughout the course of the Black Plague, we acquire quite a bit of debt. We were break-even before, but we have events, negative things going on. We are now 1,400 ducats in debt, and we are break-even in the budget. And so we are playing catch-up, trying to not death spiral by virtue of this, which is why our opener not spending a bunch of money was so important to be able to stabilize or keep stable, because in previous times, when we only had a couple hundred hours of the game, when we tried to do the Sultanate of Delhi, we just kind of fell flat on our face, or fat on our face. Ugh, the truth hurts. And we weren't able to really get anything going. A large part of that was just death spiraling to debt. Okay, so we have another parliament, and for our debate, we go noble arts. And noble arts is kind of an interesting one. Your increase in satisfaction of your estates is a flat amount. And it's 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, depending on if you have access to some modifiers. There's some modifiers like in the tech tree, but most of them are just in the opening age, so you start with them researched. And there's not a whole lot you can do to gain extra. When you declare parliament, you get +1 additional satisfaction trend, and when you do the noble arts specific debate, you get +2.5. So this is really nice for increasing the loyalty of the nobles, which is generally speaking very pressured, because every time you click a parliament agenda that's not the nobility, and the nobility is really strong, which it is for us, they get really, really upset. And so this is only the case if they are in the parliament. So for example, here the commoners aren't in parliament. But more than happy to roll this. It's also a nobles debate, which means we start out with a lot of support anyways. And so this is going to be pretty good for us, and so we'll get a bunch of satisfaction. For what we're spending this on, we are continuing to change a bunch of laws. We change our heirs' religion to any religion in terms of the laws, so they can be of any religion, which is going to help us with the tolerance levels. Important is also each level of tolerance gives a 5% satisfaction. The satisfaction helps us to avoid revolts, which are going to be kind of a feature of this disaster that we are currently going through. And so at this point, we also, with that law change, now have a positive trend towards humanists. I think we have over 50 humanists. We were trending towards spiritualists, and now we're locked in with our level of humanist, which is important because it gives us satisfaction. I think eventually we maybe go spiritualist because it does give conversion speed, but it's really not a whole lot of conversion speed, and it might just be the fact that, it might be the case that we have so many pops that are not of our religion that we just want humanist anyways. And so, for this disaster coming back in, where we are at is going to be, we are now at 40% power share and 4%, but it's important to note we're several years beyond this at this point in time. We're getting close to 20 years into the game. In 1358, we swap off of strengthened government as our cabinet action, and we swap it to pushing centralization. And then we hit a really important inflection point as it relates to institutions, because I can't remember if it was Mecca or Oman, but in one of the markets in the Middle East that we can reach from combat, professional armies appears there. So what we do is we start importing a whole bunch of fruit from there. We don't care about the fruit, we don't care about the profit, we care about pulling the institution in. And this is really important, especially because we don't have a capital that's in combat or Hokode, or if we were playing Vijayanagar, making a market kind of in the middle there, we don't have a capital that is a lot closer and more accessible to the Middle East. Our capital's all the way up there and all of our pops up there, so we have to pull it like an additional leg of the journey, and so this makes it slower, and so it's really important that we get on this early, and we do get on this early. We get gravel roads parliament after this, and we build a bunch of roads, but we are still mostly not spending, but we're starting to open up a little bit. The budget is starting to get okay, but really it's just kind of rocky at the start, and it's so much rockier if we didn't save that like 8k in terms of opening money. Because if we didn't save all that opening money, we would be in debt, we would be eating interest, and the fact that we're just barely break even in some of these situations, it really is kind of showing why the fall of Delhi specifically is a little bit troublesome. I'm not sure all the modifiers or the way they're applying to make it just super struggle bussy. We also have a bunch of bad laws at the start, but this is like 20 years in is where we're like starting to spend money basically, and so it is an opener that is, you feel like 20 years behind, which creates like kind of this interesting question is, as starting as Vijayanagar, right? If you wanted to start as Vijayanagar, can you catch up to Delhi in the 20-year span it takes Delhi to like actually get going, or 30-year span, or 40-year span, or do you value Vijayanagar's country bonuses more than Delhi's? They both have formables. Delhi can form a massive like version of India that is different than Vijayanagar's, but they both have proximity cost reduction, which is kind of the biggest one. And so the question is kind of, is this delayed like getting into it worth the trade-off for Delhi? So it's tech time. We go for source of knowledge, which gives percentage research speed. We go for exotic diplomatic gifts. I'm not 100% sure if it gives improved relation speed or monthly diplomats. It's one of those two, but we want it at this point in time because, again, our disaster is largely about improving relations with everyone, and so just either getting diplomats or improved relation speed is going to be really valuable. But improved relation speed, I actually think, is a relatively strong modifier, especially as antagonism gets more powerful. In our Austria run, as we were stacking it specifically and really kind of rampaging to some degree while completely avoiding anyone getting upset with us, and so or anyone big enough to matter getting upset with us, and so this was a little bit of an interesting one. And we also go for structured society, another Eastern tech, which gets 2.5%, if I recall correctly. Estate satisfaction to all the estates, which that's a really big tech, that's really strong. A lot of other ones, it's like 1%, and so we do go for that. At this point in time, for our fall of Delhi disaster, we are at a 58 support versus 3.8 support. So we are kind of cruising here, and it might be the case that the malices you get from this scale with how much support you have, or 100% minus your support, because things are starting to feel good at this point in time. And then we roll this event called the fair dealing, with our, what it does is it gives all of your subjects +1 opinion, and we didn't really have super high opinion on our subjects, so this is actually a pretty nice one for us. Then we get to 1364, and all of our loans are repaid. We finally repaid our loans. Our net income is 84, and we have 61% inflation. We go for a law change and go for a central council law. The fact that this law change is right after this kind of implies to me that we might have been on parliament increased tax to get that 84 net income, but okay. We go for central council law. I think we had a law that gave decentralization trend. Central council gives increased centralization trend. It also gives a trend towards aristocracy, which is not as nice, and I think some cabinet efficiency as well as nobles powers, something like this. But I do think early on this one's pretty nice because centralization trend is a valuable resource, and so it gives you a little bit more. We started to invest in eco a lot more at this point and focus on roads and stuff that's in really high demand. And so at this point we're kind of mainly building close to the capital. We're building stuff like silks, specifically for the east. You're going to have a lot of countries that really value horses, or a lot of your pops really value horses, specifically the nobles, and so these horses we push in this location up here, really valuable. But we get with the production efficiency we get from the silk, it's a lot of fabrics and silks. It's a lot of stuff just on the capital. With our current level of urbanization, we're not looking to add urbanization at this point in time, and we're just doing the really profitable stuff, because again, all of our stuff costs 61% more, and so we can be a little bit more patient with it, but we do want to start generating a little bit more money. At this point in time, we also now have 23% pro-army spread in combat, and that's in the location that is the market capital itself. And this is important because once it is present in combat, this is going to make it so that the entire market starts spreading this. But also from combat, we can trade into Delhi. So once we get into combat, we will trade it into Delhi and Varanasi, and so this is the plan. Something that happened in our Vijayanagar run is we had a market capital in Raiku, and then we moved it back to Vijayanagar, and little did we know, this effectively breaks your progress towards institutions, because the institutions only spread in the market capital. So that is a little bit of an interesting factor that you want to make sure, if you are getting an institution, you don't move the market capital until that institution is present there. But at this point, we are still only a quarter of the way there, and it's 1364. So it's really going to be quite a while before we get all the institutions. And the entire point of pulling the institutions is we need to get the institutions there before we research all of the tech that is in the free tree that is any good, because at that point we're effectively breaking our technology research speed. And so it's a little bit of a race against time in regards to pulling the institutions to us. So the year is now 1371, and the fall of Delhi situation or disaster is almost resolved. We're at 95% versus 3% in terms of the support. We have Jaunpur, which is kind of in this region here, declare independence on us, which is, I think this might have been our first independence deck, but normally you get a big deck from here and a big deck from Bahmani, but because we released them as subjects, it wasn't an issue. And so we effectively are bricking some of the pain that we would otherwise experience as a result of this releasing. But again, a big portion of it is driven by the crown power. We spent all that time just barely breaking even. If we had extra territory with zero control, we would have had a tax efficiency malice, and we would have been losing money that entire time. So I do think it was pretty important. But then a little bit after that, we get authority restored, which is the conclusion of the disaster here, which is a successful disaster conclusion. We get another independence movement. I forget exactly where it was, and this was a little bit confusing because I thought that it ended with the disaster. I don't know if that's a bug, but okay. At this point, we have 0.2 tolerance of heretics as well, or of heathens slash heretics. Just to give an idea where we're at, I think we have 1.5 tolerance or something like this for our primary religion, but all of our pops, virtually all of our pops, are going to be of not our religion. So I think... like, here's the starting situation. Although we're much better than 2% because the subjects we released were entirely Hindu, we're still overwhelmingly, we're still overwhelmingly Hindu and don't have very many Sunni pops. At this point in time, we revoke a unique privilege called Dharmic Communities, which is in here. This was giving us tolerance of heathens, which again is a strong modifier. I'm not sure if our modifier was after this or before this, but you can see this pop conversion speed. We were not converting any pops before this, but a big reason we didn't want to pull it was not just the satisfaction, which I do think we got a little bit more satisfaction right before we did this, but also we got this unrest modifier, minus 10%. That's huge, and that is stopping us from hitting rebellions. We didn't want to hit rebellions during the disaster, didn't want the headache, and so this is why we had left this. Also, it's like 30 stab to revoke, and so this is going to be a bit of a big deal, but also we have this unique building called the madrasa, or these Muslims have this building called the madrasa, which is really, really good at converting. The base conversion rate for pops is 2 a month. That's 2 a month. Let's scroll up and see how many pops we have here in Delhi. Yeah. So that's the base conversion rate. What the madrasa does is it gives you an additional 10 base conversion. Now you can affect this with percentage modifiers, and using a cabinet action starts to be really quick. Notably, there's no convert area cabinet action where there is a increase area control, integrate area, promote area, assimilate area. There's no version of that for religion, which is considerably painful considering you have to convert the religion in order to get a core at this point in time, which is a significant problem, which is kind of the big issue for us at the juncture we're at in the run right now, is we can't core anything because we have to convert it to Sunni somehow, and it's just too slow. But by moving our base rate from 2 to 12, we are effectively X6ing our conversion rate as it related before. And I think at this point in time, we have a frame of reference note at somewhere where we have 7.7% Sunni pops. And so that's going to be the number that we're kind of starting with, and that's going to be kind of our baseline for how fast is the converting actually happening when we kind of revisit this in another 60 years or so. But okay, we also turn up the Mamluk barracks. We turn a few of these back on, just 6, because we really don't need that many, and the maintenance cost on manpower buildings is insane. We had them all turned off. And now we turn a few of them back on so we can have a standing army. And we kind of want us to have a standing army because we want to annex some of our subjects, and loyalty is a problem. But really, while having a standing army was really, really effective at pushing up loyalty when we were playing as Venice, it doesn't feel that effective as Delhi. And I think the reason why is that it counts conscripts towards this, and it counts the conscripts for quite a lot. And both us and our subjects have a lot of conscripts, so the relative power as we add army doesn't really change that much, and we discovered this a little bit later, but okay. We also changed the subject type on one of our subjects. I think if we come over to the map, we can see that it is like a subject that we released like right here, and very, very small, or we subjugated someone in here, and we get a 10-year annex on them. We start trying to convert the province and the silver mine, both increasing control first so that we don't have that conversion malice as much from the control, and then flipping it to convert province. But we only do that for a little bit of time before we decide, hey, this is just like way too slow. There's no way this is like possibly worth, but we really care about the silver that's up in here. Like, there's a couple silver here. I think we may as well show it on the map here. But there is a little bit of silver up in the left portion. If it is visible, you can see there's the silver, we keep talking about it. It's a really valuable resource, especially because our market has a ton of pops, and I think that because we have a ton of pops, we're not probably making as much from trading the silver away, very often in a lot of runs, a huge portion of your income is trade income from trading away gold or silver. We're not getting that quite as much. We really want to get the tax-based value out of the silver, because if you're not trading away and you're consuming it in market, the price is higher. And if the price is higher, that means more of the value is based on the tax rather than the trade, and because that is the case, we want to extract the tax value, but the tax value requires that you have a lot of control and market access, whereas trade value doesn't require anything other than you just have the good. And so if we have zero control, zero market access, you just build that sucker and then you trade it away and it doesn't matter. But if it's getting consumed in your market, then that is going to be negative for you. And so we kind of just have this struggle where in the back of our head, we're always kind of like aware of this silver, but we really can't properly make use of it as we would like to. All right, so now the year is 1375, and we start to collapse prices in our market. This is not something we were really doing before, and so we were paying the full value plus like 60% or 50% for buildings. So we were paying 150% for buildings. Once we collapse prices, we'll only pay 50%. And the reason for this is we knew that the time horizon was going to be sufficiently long after our investments relative to the amount of time it would take to collapse prices, such that collapsing prices didn't make that much sense mathematically, because we were investing so slow and we had to spend a lot of money into the disaster. But now the disaster's over, and so we start to collapse prices. At this point, we also have 44% inflation, which is quite a bit. Now, earlier, we talked about the Zemi power being really, really high at game start. Much higher than the value we have here. In fact, they're cut off here. They don't even get representation here, which, you know, shout out to being an oppressed minority, except you're the majority. But at this point, things have started to shift. The Zemi power has gone from 50% to 34%, and most of it is going to the nobles. And a big part of this is the way that the societal values work, which we are pushing into aristocracy quite a bit. Not really that intentionally, but there's a lot of events that are good from one perspective, but they give you a lot of aristocrats, or they give you a lot of aristocracy value as kind of the trade-off. And I think that this is something that's a bit interesting that people have been a little bit concerned about regarding which is better regarding the nobility and the fact that they eat more goods than they get paid. Well, first of all, the Dhimmi also eat more goods than they get paid. This is something that will outrage some people, but the amount of money that they're getting at the tax base, they're spending more than that. But second of all, aristocracy gives us a lot more nobles in towns and cities. As we push towards this value, we get a lot more nobles, and this increases the power. And I think this is how the Dhimmi power, or the Zimmi power, was getting diluted out. But also, secondarily, I think that we actually, despite this stimulus that's free, because they're spending more than they're receiving, I still think it's better for us to move on to plutocracy, especially with our setup, because we have that additional 20% max tax on burgers. And this means we can bring, in terms of a free money modifier, sure, you get that free stimulus from them eating more goods than they can make, more goods than they get money for. But with our extra max tax, if we have burgers and those burgers are getting most of the money, which is helped because this extra possible burgers in towns and cities, cities isn't there, it's cities as well. We would have more burgers, and the burgers would get the bigger share of the tax. And if they're getting a bigger share of the tax, and we have a bigger max tax for them, and then from our max tax efficiency is then applied as a free money modifier. So if we take 20 from them and we have 50% tax efficiency, we get 30. That 10 appeared out of nowhere. I do actually think we would make more money being plutocracy oriented, which is a little bit interesting, despite the fact that the nobles are spending more money on their goods than they are receiving in terms of their budget. Okay, so continuing on, we notice our peasants aren't really converting that well. And that's apparently because we have a reform that is preventing conversion. I think I meant privilege here. I don't know if there's a reform that prevents it. But we revoke that and we start spamming the madrasas. We start spamming the madrasas in a lot of areas, and so now we are starting to get to the religious conversion, and we have here in our check mark, it wasn't 7.7%, it's 6.7%. So that's the current percentage percentage of the nation that is Sunni. We go for, in terms of our techs, burger literacy tech. This is in the free tree, 10% burger literacy. Cost of court, which is really far down the free tree. Cost of court decreasing one of your pretty significant costs now. Cost of court is a relatively expensive expense. This is used to determine how much you pay for increasing your legitimacy in terms of the slider. Legitimacy is really strong to be having, and so cost of court is going to be something that we kind of are a fan of, and also one that gives monthly prestige, because a little bit of prestige would be nice. We noticed that also in Lhasa, there is now, and Lhasa's up here, there is now meritocracy. So we start pulling lumber from Lhasa into Varanasi, which having cheap lumber is really nice anyways in terms of collapsing prices, but we're also pulling meritocracy, and so this is going to be good. We build a couple market warehouses. This is going to stabilize prices. The market warehouse gives a bunch of additional storage. In fact, this might have been covered in a Tinto building. Okay, so the market warehouse gives a little bit of trade capacity advantage. That's not what it's about, though. It's about the maximum stockpile capacity, which is overall going to smooth things out. If you have a price collapse and then you store up a big stockpile, the price doesn't really re-increase until after the stockpile is depleted. I'm not sure the exact mechanical way in which this functions, but what this does is kind of regularizes prices and makes things a little bit less volatile, which means that you are going to have fewer spots where you really want to spend in a particular spot, but it's not going to be that profitable. Now, we also change around our cabinet action, where we are starting to convert province. This really, we found, just wasn't that effective. We're pushing societal values with our other cabinet action, but it just didn't really feel that good when we were doing it in terms of the numbers. And part of why it doesn't feel good is because it's giving a flat rate. We have an enormous population, so converting everything is very, very slow as Delhi relative to other nations. For a parliament, we get expand gravel roads, which we probably just focus on expanding gravel roads, and we are kind of done changing laws. At this point in time, we're probably doing request additional taxes mostly because we're not really valuing expanding at this point in time. We could have just expanded as much as possible, but our subject loyalty was already pressured. We didn't really want to use cabinet actions to integrate areas, and we don't want low control areas because it's going to negatively affect our crown power. So at this point, kind of the only useful button for us to do is to request additional taxes, and we've been talking about Parliament a little bit here and there. It would be nice if there were additional parliamentary actions that were good once you kind of had stuff set up, because the opening salvo, it really feels interesting, like you're making decisions where you're kind of using all of prepare for war, request additional taxes, and ask for law changes. But once you've gotten stuff set up and you also set up your ability to get CBs from subjects, then it feels like it's mostly request additional taxes. We also start buffing. We start building in all the premium RGOs that are available around the map. We start building bailiffs in these. These are going to give twofold value. One, it's going to give us a little bit of control there, not a whole lot, but we will now gain some tax from those areas with the bailiff. For whatever reason, we are able to promote up now, and so we are able to get employees. And so those bailiffs are going. But also, at this point, we have a 16% crown power, and so that's just to provide a little bit of a baseline. Now, there is a couple of government reforms we have that are unique to us that I think are maybe worth talking about. So we're going to take a quick look at them and read off what they do. So the first reform, and both of these reforms you unlock and are not available at the start of the game. The first one is the Diwan Bandagan, and this is an upgraded form of your reform that allows you to build the Mamluk barracks. And what this gives you is 5% literacy, max literacy for slaves. So considering we have an enormous slave population, this is a really big increase in our overall literacy. But the slave literacy specifically makes them more disloyal, or decreases their satisfaction. So literacy on slaves is negative from the perspective that it makes them unsatisfied, but it's positive because it's pulling up our average literacy. We didn't end up slotting this in, but we thought we were going to slot it in soon. It also gives 2.5% discipline and a 0.15 monthly army tradition, which is quite a lot. And then, of course, can build Mamluk barracks. If we switch off of Sunni, we won't have access to this. And the second is the Tughlaq slave army, again unlocked through an event, which gives another 5% max literacy for slaves. But if we have a really high tolerance, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It also gives +1 possible government reform, plus 0.05 progress to quality, and -5 character life expectancy, which is kind of an interesting modifier because your characters won't have as much time to gain stats and have higher stats, and it's a little bit hard to evaluate. I'm not sure exactly how much value we put on that in the aggregate sense, but okay, we are going to be doing that. Next up, we have a little bit of tech that we're going into. We're going on to a tech that gives us construction speed, another tech that gives us tolerance of heathens. I do think that this is probably the Sunni tech. There is a Sunni specific tech that is quite powerful. Again, tolerance, strong modifier in the Sunni tree. Generally, I think that there are stronger techs in the Sunni tree than there are in any of the Christian trees. And one that gives increased trade route capacity, which I think is another Sunni one. Something I wanted to emphasize is our cap starts right here. And we, in this run, didn't move it over to Delhi. Delhi got moved to in the first run before we restarted, but it's right here. And the crown power that you get, or crown power, the way it's tied, is it's really tied to pops. Because it is a massive pool, and every location adds to the pool, it adds an amount of points. But it is adding points based on those pops. And so if you have really, really low pop areas that have zero control, this isn't really that big a deal. And if you have a lot of high pop areas that have high control, this is really good. And one of the reasons we actually have 16 control is because all of our pops are around here. And they're not as flung out in the kind of further reaches of our empire, and they're more centrally located. And so this is more effective for us having high crown power, which is kind of one of these downstream effects from our location of our capital that is nice for us, is that it is helping us to have higher crown power than if we had the capital a little further north in Delhi, where it would be further away from a huge scrum of pops that we have down here, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to discuss or talk about. We build in our market centers also here, having started to build buildings and generate income and build stuff for civilian infrastructure, and finally building enough scriptoriums to meet pop demand so that we can get script books in our market, in our new market warehouses, as it were. Now that we finally have access to books that aren't being consumed by the pops, we build libraries, and we build them in the market centers. And a big reason we build them in the market centers is this positively affects the rate at which we experience tech spread, or institution spread. And we are building them to try and massage, again, meritocracy from the Varansari market, from Lhasa into Delhi, but also professional armies from Kambat into Delhi as well. And so looking to increase that by building libraries in each of these. In theory, if we get way ahead of books in Delhi, because this is our primary market, we could also export books so that we could build libraries, so that we could better push the institutions. This is like kind of a common play pattern. If there's something that you need in terms of infrastructure to get things going, whether it's glass, masonry, lumber, books, naval supplies, liquor. These are kind of 6 goods that you often need to perform certain functions that you need to have in your market. Often you'll just push it from a market where you have access to a lot of it. We didn't do that in this game, but this is something that's certainly reasonable that we could have done from Delhi. So at this point in time, our construction starts getting throttled, or our ability to expand economically starts getting throttled by our construction speed. And we are expanding RGOs that are kind of close to the capital, but the other ones aren't going to add to the tax base. We could trade them away, but we don't really have a lot of trade range, so it's really hard, even though it's a very rich area that has really good resources, it's really hard for us to get value out of trade right now just because we can't push stuff that far, which is why we don't want to just build a bunch of cotton RGOs up here, because there's very little control, so we would get nothing to the tax base. And so what we end up starting to do is we start to push for civilian infrastructure. We start building a bunch of towns. Incidentally, towns give +5 control. That's 5 less control malice as it relates to crown power, and kind of featuring our earlier discussion where it's about where the pops are. As we urbanize areas that are really high population, this is going to positively affect our crown power just in a general sense, in kind of a very slow way, but it is going to be a little bit of a factor. Now, the year is now 1385, and we have in the market of combat 55% professional armies spread, and we roll a really nice parliament here in Fund Farming Estate. This gives something like a 33% discount on farms, which is quite a lot, and we have, kind of in terms of the good resources that we have, all of this counts as farming. The silk, the cotton, anything that even resembles a plant counts as farming. And by resembles a plant, I mean the elephants too. That counts as farming. And we get a discount on all of this, so this is huge. We spend an enormous amount of ducats here. We have a big bank. Normally, we choose to have a lot of our building after a parliament or in a parliament, and the reason why we save up, generally speaking, is so that if we get a parliament debate that is going to be giving us increased building or decreased building costs, we have a bunch of money available to us to be able to push this. And then if we don't roll a parliament debate like that, then we can just spend the money anyways. So we generally have big spending sprees every 5 years, and since we're making money, since we're actually having money now, we just get this absolutely massive one as it relates to the farming, especially because most of our good resources are farming. We don't like have a bunch of mines or something like this. We have a bunch of stuff like silk and elephants, farm goods like elephants. But this is what we have. It's really big for us. And then we declare kind of our first war of aggression, which we sounded just like that loud car as we charged into Sama. We subjugate Sama. Swat was one of their, up here in the north, was one of their allies, and we release from them a little guy who is going to have claims, so that we will have a Reconquest CB later. Kind of regret taking Sama because the loyalty is starting to pressure us. All of our subjects at this point in time are disloyal. Now, the Indian subject types just give -300 loyalty. I've left feedback on this. I think it's a little bit much, but I certainly understand it because they have 3 different subject types, so they have access to additional subject types. But all these guys are super disloyal, and so I'm not sure exactly how we're going to make use of them, but we do have this note that they are all disloyal at this point in time. We switch, in terms of our cabinet actions, to Dev province here. And the 2 provinces we are deving are going to be Central Doab, which contains our capital, but also, if we're pushing control down this way, it's going to use 3 locations through Central Doab. And remember this conversation we had kind of a bit ago, where with really high dev, this increases the value of dev and increases the value of dev province. Central Doab's there, Delhi's there, they have really high dev already, and so this increases the marginal value of dev because it is decreasing proximity costs, and so we are deving, in particular, Central Doab. There the province map mode is, but that's Central Doab here, and I think that, just generally speaking, our vein is going to go, kind of traveling this way, is going to go through Braj, 1 location, Delhi, 3 to 4 locations, and then kind of push up here. So we also dev province in Delhi. Gurd would also be a way that we could push dev eventually to the south through Gurd, and then through here, and then through Namar. And really, just generally speaking, we get a lot of surface area, or not surface area, this is the wrong way. we have, when we dev province, generally speaking, the way in which we have to push control, the more provinces or the more locations you have to push through, the more valuable the dev province is, because remember, most of the value of dev province is on this decreased distance cost capital, which is now proximity cost modifier, and so the more locations you travel through, the more it is going to positively affect downstream control, and we just have, I think it's 2 of these in Delhi and Central Doab are effectively giving us 3. Although the Central Doab one is specifically traveling south because our capital is like this northern location in Central Doab, but we're going to want control down here eventually anyways. You move through like, I think 2 or 3 in Gurd and like 2 or 3 here, or maybe like 3 or 4 here, and so generally speaking really efficient. And then down here, this is the scrum where there's, in 4 of these provinces alone, there's like 50 locations where dev province is very effective, but we do start using the cabinet action in that regard to be doing that. We also start building a bunch of marketplaces, and we're building marketplaces specifically in areas that are far from the market capital, which is not necessarily intuitive, but on the periphery, we're not going to really get a lot of tax base in these urban locations, but and we also don't have a lot of control there, but the value of the marketplace is just in your trade capacity, and trade capacity doesn't scale with control, and it doesn't scale with market access. So on the periphery and the less valuable urban areas, it's really, really nice to be able to build a bunch of marketplaces there. And so this is going to be good for us. Alright, remember what we have here, where a huge chunk of our northwest is arid. This is pretty bad because, again, not a lot of pop capacity, and most of this area at this point in time is overpopulated. And so what we end up doing is we add 1 town per province in all of these arid areas. And this is kind of multifunctional in some ways. Normally, this wouldn't be so good because most of our power base is down here. This is where we have control, this is where we have market access, and so urban areas that urban buildings we build up here really aren't going to give us that much value, and so that is a bit unfortunate. But what it does do is it gives additional pop capacity right there, 20k pop capacity, so now that location could grow again. But also migration is semi-local. It gives a spot for the people in the other overpopulated places to migrate from, and as pops leave, then those locations can grow again, because being overpopulated completely breaks your pop growth. So in this way, we are helping to facilitate pop growth, but also, we're just going to build marketplaces in those far-off areas, and that's like all we're going to build, and so we're going to get additional trade capacity. Here used to be called merchant capacity in one of the old Tinto buildings, but this is going to allow us to get value out of these areas and facilitate the pop growth, and so this is going to be nice for us. In terms of technology, we start pushing for exchange of ideas, which, if I recall correctly, gives research speed. One of the research speed techs we had before is a Muslim tech, and then this one, or another one of them, is an Eastern tech. I forget which is which. We go for a little bit of cabinet efficiency and max rural RGO size, which is a very nice modifier, especially now we are starting to hit the cap on a lot of our stuff. Before, max rural RGO size would not be a modifier we would have gone up to until we started spinning up the economy, because we're not hitting the cap, we're not approaching the cap, so it's not going to be a useful modifier at that point in time. Another thing we start doing is we start building a bunch of libraries in the Delhi market to prepare for the fact that a professional army is going to be coming in sometime soon. So we are starting to build a bunch of libraries there. Libraries encourage or help out with our ability to generate institution growth, or maybe at this point in time, we were almost, at this point in time, I think we were almost finished spreading control, professional armies to Delhi, the location, and once you have it in your market capital, then it spreads to all locations within that market, and so by adding libraries to locations within that market, we are helping with the institution spread. And so, nope, I got it wrong. In 1395, we get professional armies in combat, and then after that, we start sending it to Delhi, but it is sending super fast to Delhi because we have way more trade capacity in Delhi than we do Kambat, and so we are pulling 4% a month rather than some like 0.2%, 0.3%, 0.5% in terms of what we're sending Delhi. We probably could have been a little bit more proactive with increasing our trade capacity in Combat, and this would have been good, but we're going to have it in Delhi shortly, so those libraries are going to be useful. And at this point, in terms of income, we have 128 net income with no minting going, because we, of course, are keeping it down low so we can decrease our inflation, which is still a problem. Of that, 224 of it is Zemi tax of our total income, not our net. And so the Zemi tax or the Dhimmi tax for us is really, really substantive. There's also another building we have called the Sufi Lodge, which is going to be an important building for us because it increases conversion by 10%. So specifically where we have a lot of kind of nearest the capital, it is urban only, or sorry, it's in any location. It doesn't have to be urban. We start building these. The reason we're building them close to the capital is because close to the capital is really going to be the only place that we get a lot of conversion, but specifically we build them on top of the madrasas, which are giving us flat conversion. The Sufi Lodge is giving us percent conversion, the madrasa is giving us flat conversion, so in total it will help quite a bit with the conversion, which again we need to core anything. So in 1397, we do get in the location of Delhi, not the entire market, but in the location, we get professional army. Now it's going to be spreading to all the locations within that market, and so that's going to be good for us. We also add a ton of military, courtesy of the Mamluk barracks. Normally, you'd be able to support like 2 units with the sergeantry, which is the generic manpower building that people get to build 1 of, but we don't even have armories yet, because we don't have professional army yet, but the Mamluk barracks says we build a 61 stack, and we do it just for loyalty. It turns out it really wasn't anywhere near as effective as we wanted it to be. It wasn't as effective as it was in the Venice run. And also, yeah, it wasn't as effective in the Venice run. And so that it didn't play out exactly the way we wanted, but we can support just a really large army without even having access to professional armies. So that is something kind of worth noting. In terms of tech, we get a maximum rural RGO tech, or we start researching, we put these into the queue, trade capacity through, or trade range through land, and additional culture capacity. Culture capacity is kind of useful for us, but we can't core with culture capacity alone, so it's really not super useful for us because we, again, have to convert those pops now. So in terms of where we're building our roads, we're mainly building them upstream, and I think this is a point we covered before, but we're just covering it again, because downstream roads are not going to be as effective. There's a massive river complex that travels through here because you're already benefiting from the downstream effect, and so this is why we do focus on them. We annex Garhwal, and then we naively write Gwalior to follow. It's some time before we annex Gwalior because of loyalty issues, but we pretend like it's not. And so in 1404, we get meritocracy in Delhi as well. So now Delhi has meritocracy, again, working to spread it from various places. I think we eventually started getting a spread from someplace other than Lhasa, like it might have been even Pinya or something like this, pulled into Varanasi and then into Delhi, some sort of a chain like this. So I don't think Lhasa was the end one, but we do have meritocracy spreading in Delhi now. So we have 2 institutions that are coming up. There's a mission for increased infrastructure that's really, really strong in the opener because it lets you push centralization. We weren't pushing it along before because we had to have a really, really high building level in our capital to be able to get that. But we finally pip it. We probably should have valued building in the capital a little bit more as a consequence of it. And so we are coming along in terms of centralization. And when we get that, we will get an increased control trend of 0.5. We use a cabinet action on top of that for like 0.75, and then plus the natural value we have of like 0.2 for the duration of that event, which is like 5 years. We will get +1 control a month. So that is pretty significant because it allows us to do that. But also you roll a bunch of events that give plus control. So I think by the end of it, we'll probably have something like 80 control. And it's just very powerful. We declare a war on Chagatai, which is up here. And this kind of doesn't really go that well for us. They do have a market capital there, and that's what we're declaring for, is we just want that market capital, and kind of really not much else. We do subjugate someone down to the south. But in particular, the AI was pretty good / annoying against us. And what they did is they would avoid our armies and then siege down our locations because we have no forts, because we deleted all the forts, which we should have rebuilt some of them, but hey, it's okay to let your pops be enslaved, which is exactly what happened. Quite painful, and they pulled them back to locations that are kind of a little bit more in the south, off map here. And I don't think we're going to be able to see that, but a little bit in the south off map here. But these are the locations we were conquering anyways, so really it was just a relocation program of sorts, where we were able to maneuver pops over there, and also, it was all in locations, kind of coming back to this map, it was all in locations that were, in this arid zone for the most part, and so we couldn't grow our pops really that well anyways, so maybe this was just a great relocation plan rather than a poorly executed war. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it, and so, okay, so at this point, we start collapsing prices in the Varanasi or the Varanasi market, and are generally looking to build both there and in Delhi. Previously, Delhi's just been our primary, but the thing is we have decent control kind of in this circle or in this oval here in particular, and while it is more convenient to only build in Delhi I think has also expanded a little bit into this market at this point. While it's more convenient to just build in Delhi, we still have value to be had in the Varanasi market. It's just also a little bit annoying to manage two markets at once, but we start doing this, and I actually think that this is kind of emblematic of a play pattern that I think is strong as the game goes on, which is at game start, you probably want your capital and your market center just smack on top of each other and, hide the kids. This has to do with just kind of the way you extract value. In particular, if you have a lot of control and market access in an area, it's going to take very little months for you to replace the cost of a building. But if you have a capital with poor market access, say 70%, which isn't even that poor, it's going to take you 66 months to replace, which doesn't sound like a lot more than 46. But then when you calculate compounding effects, in like 10 years, you will have plus 250% versus plus 500% if it was a market capital in the capital. So generally speaking, you want to stack them on top of each other in terms of a gameplay pattern. That way you are maximizing your value in these locations, especially, even around that where you have 90 market access kind of in the circle around it and you're still getting a good amount of control, you're still getting quite a bit. And also this compounding really looks quite a lot as you look over the course of many hundreds of years, but eventually you get throttled by building them. It's stuff like this. And so you want these stacked on top of each other. However, as the game goes on, you get better and better at pushing control, right? And eventually you hit a point where you can put your capital in between two markets, and those areas will both have good market access and also both have good control. Like if we can push 100 control to both Delhi and also Varanasi, then from a location in between the two of them, then this is actually a really good location for a capital. And so I think this comes into play. I think that you also see this with England. One of the reasons England is in such a good spot is because eventually through maritime you can push control to all of northern France and also the lowlands, and so effectively you get multiple power bases, because if we have 100 control here but not really pushing as much control on the far side, just kind of like 100 control here, 100 control here, we effectively have two of those power bases where we are getting like around plus 100 and something like this. And so this is what we're doing, and we start upgrading around 8 towns. There's a town on the other side of Delhi that we went out of our way to mention that we were upgrading, but we are upgrading it for pop limit. And so, it's 8 towns, I think, mostly in Varanasi, but also a little bit in Delhi. We're starting to get things going. Actually, the towns were probably almost all in Delhi because we haven't gotten these prices fixed yet. So the 8 towns were probably all in Delhi, probably in between, or generally speaking, we were trying to build in between Delhi and also the capital, just in terms of where those two locations are, is I think Delhi, that's not the one. I think Delhi is this wheat that we have right here, and our capital is it's this wheat here, and our capital is one of these cottons or silks just kind of over here. And so in the scrum in between these two, this is really where we're trying to build, because the locations directly in the middle will be kind of half and half between having the market access and having the control. And so the 8 towns are just kind of just going to be in this vicinity here. We get a oh, sorry, the CB on Chagatai, it was part of a DHE. It was a dynamic historical event that gave it to us, and so that is something worth noting. But we also start building in our various locations a bunch of civilian infrastructure, a bunch of bridges, a bunch of libraries, although we already had a good chunk of libraries, these types of things, so that we can make better use out of the lands that we do have. So we don't end up giving out as many Zemi privileges as we probably should have. We had given out enough to max the tax, but we give out another one that gives a trend towards jurisprudence. Now we have enough trend towards jurisprudence to use another further Ulema privilege, and the Ulema privilege gives 5% literacy, and so just kind of making note of the fact that we have an Ulema privilege that is Sunni-oriented, that is giving additional literacy. We have the Zimmi/Dhimmi that are all giving estate privileges of various kinds that are not accessible to other religions. You have to be Muslim to unlock the estate. And we also have the 10% burger max tax modifier. Just in terms of talking through why Muslim is so strong, there's really a whole lot of stuff that is going on in this, and what is going on. Next up, in terms of techs, we start pushing for Ramadan, which is just minus 5% pop food consumption, which is pretty good. And then we go for a monthly legitimacy, a little bit of initiative, a combat stat, very strong in the early game. I think it's a tech that gives 20-25% initiative, and one that gives cavalry power, which is unique to Delhi, one of their unique techs. Overall, the cav power one's not that strong. At this point, we're starting to feel the pain of not having good tech selections, because all other things equal, I'm not sure that we would have taken the cav power tech, because cavalry starts falling off. We're not going to fight any wars that are meaningfully difficult in the near future, and by the time we're like age 4, we're probably preferring not to build that much cavalry anyways, or not have it be like the brunt of our forces. And so the cavalry power, I think for us, is just not that useful. And we even have a note here: nearly all the useful tech has been researched, but this emphasizes the importance of us actually going out of our way to get the tech spread early on, and start spreading it to our markets and doing this type of thing. Because if you're China, like 10 years off of here, or even a little bit less, because China starts with a more research speed, I believe, you're going to just have your research be bricked for an extended period of time, maybe 10 to 20 years, maybe even longer than that, while you're waiting for the institutions to spread. Because the AI is bad at spreading institutions. You're waiting for this period. It's probably like even 50 or 60 years. And you have this huge advantage of having a ton of pops, but you don't have access to the institutions in the same way India does, where India is, we're getting like close. To be fair, we could have executed it better. We're getting close to having a tech-bricked kind of period, but we don't actually get there, and so this is something that I think is worth noting. In 1408, we get a dynamic historical event that gives us centralization. We're up to 81 centralization at this point. Just to kind of quickly go over what it gives, I don't think it has been changed since this Reddit post here, but it is giving a bunch of crown power, minus distance cost to capital, now called proximity, fair enough. Maximum war exhaustion is a negative modifier, and counter espionage, and so we are starting to get quite a bit of crown power percentage from this, and we have 3.2% inflation left, so we are almost also out of the woods as it relates to inflation. In the capital, and in Delhi, where we've been deving up, we have around 40 dev in those locations. So we start with like 30 or 35. We've been increasing dev. It roughly doubles the speed at which you're getting development. I think we're around 30 years in, but this is decreasing in terms of, I remember doing the math on this, in terms of how much cheaper it is making the control or the proximity expenditure of that distance. It's like 12.5% cheaper. And so this for us is representing like +1 control in all the areas that can touch the capital, or even more down here. And so this is a pretty useful, because it has, for every control it makes it cheaper, or proximity version of control, or it's actually like 0.6 control or 0.75, but for every link in the chain it makes cheaper. It does everything downstream, so having more dev in the capital is really, really nice, specifically as you spread out, but then you're spreading out in all directions, right? And so if you were going to get increased dev, like let's say downstream, then it's not going to affect this direction or this direction. And so it's really valuable in the capital specifically, and specifically if you're on a coast, because if you're on a coast, you exit into the harbor as well, and you can really reduce that low close to zero much more easily than you can a sort of a land connection. But that is about where we're at there. So at this point, we are now pulling banking institution and Renaissance into combat, but again, professional army, it hasn't spread to enough of our locations. We have to have we need to have 20% of our population, not locations, population needs to be having that in their locations. And remember, a lot of our pop is in this scrum. It's not down here in combat. Almost all of it's up here. And so those locations are still spreading. We're at 30.7% present, but we have a lot of locations that are really close to getting it. So we're not that far off of a professional army embrace. At this point, in terms of the nobles' power, the nobles are very, very powerful. Let's take a look at where they started in terms of in this Tinto flavor. They were at like 40%, but remember where we had them before. The Demi went from 50% to like 30-something% or something like this. Now the nobles are at 46% power. Again, this is the urbanizing with aristocracy, and the Demi are at 14%. We start annexing Malwa here, which Malwa is a country that we had released in this scrum, kind of in this region, and to be honest, we just kind of get bricked on our ability to annex Malwa. We don't annex Malwa by the end of the kind of this session that we're going over here, and so this is a little bit of we just too much disloyalty. It was a bit of an issue, and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit more later as time goes on. In 1414, we get our inflation to zero. We probably shouldn't have got it to exactly zero. We probably should have just floated 1%. But okay, we turn up the minting and we go from 0 income from minting to 80 income from minting, getting 191 net. But that's probably 191 net without the parliament. So this is going to be good for us as well. We also improve cultural opinion with Malwa. So when we eventually get them annexed, it's going to be cheaper for us to accept their culture. We go for, in terms of tech, food production, which is kind of an okay one, but we're not really going to have food issues as much in India. Naval damage, which is going to be nice, and at this point we have 13% pro-army in 1413, so 1415. So just a year later, we had spread an additional 10%, because a lot of it is just all of our locations are spreading in the Delhi market, and so a lot of our locations are almost finished. So we're almost there, and we are almost out of useful tech. To be honest, naval damage it's a good tech, but it's not going to be that useful for us anytime in the near future, but I suppose it's researchable. And so that, I think, is the actual last useful tech, though, for us. After that, shortly after that, we get banking and combat. There's a lot more trade volume that's going on, and so it's easier to spread than the previous institutions. It is 42% in Delhi, and at this point, in terms of income, we have 418 net with the parliament increased taxes. And so when we increase the taxes with the parliament, request additional taxes, we're now at 418 net. It's important to note that this only is present for like 1 year, but what it represents is like, for a lot of countries, maybe 20 to 30% increase in total income between parliaments, maybe closer to 20%, but this is worth noting. And for our debate, we do get fund farming estates, which we talked about earlier as being kind of a big one for us as a result of what our resources look like, but we dropped 5k of spending in this time period, and so we had 5k laying around because we save it kind of between parliaments so that we have opportunities like this, so that we get 33% off of all of our farming, which, as everyone knows, includes elephants. So at this point, we start upgrading our first locations to cities that we've done. City upgrade is 5k base, 2.5k without it, so it is very expensive, but we go for Sagadwari, which is the capital, and Kol, heading up towards Delhi, which we incidentally don't see up on the map, but is somewhere in here. I don't know if one of these is a flavor name for Delhi, but somewhere in here is Delhi. But we are going to look to connect a line of cities along rivers to Delhi, and then also stretching down this way in terms of our early city upgrades, as well as having city upgrades around the capital here. And the reason for this is we are eventually going to get the Pound Lock Canal building. This is the Pound Lock Canal. It requires that we build it in a city. We do see that 3 requirement, and reduces distance cost to capital, which is proximity, and gives a little bit of food production. Unfortunately, you can only build 1 per city now, or fortunately, as a little bit of a balance reason. But this is the building that we are looking to go after. Now, at this point, we get a CB on Dehli, which is up here, and it is an insult CB. We get these periodically against a lot of these Indian pops, and I'm not sure, or Indian nations, I'm not sure if this is because we're different from them culturally and they hate us, or what exactly, but it is pretty nice because we don't have to use a CB to get this. I think it's like plus 100% cost, but that's kind of not that big a deal. It means we don't have to use our parliament juice in order to be able to expand like this, and so we do go after Dehli without any further notes. In 1417, we embrace professional army, and we go for the gunsmithing tech, which, as you might be able to infer, allows you to build guns. The handgunners tech, which is the first unit we'll have that is from this age, so it will be doubling in unit power from the previous age in terms of how many men are in each unit, which effectively informs how strong the unit is. After that, we'll go for cannon maker and Hofnice, or the name of the cannon, whatever that is, and this is going to be so we have sieging, but these are useful techs. There are no useful techs outside of professional army, so this is what we're going for. We unlock one of those privileges we talked about towards the start of the game, the Gala slave army, which gives slave literacy, an extra government reform, decreased life expectancy, and extra progression towards quality. And we rode nearly anything that is in distance of the capital as a part of a parliament. For our parliament, we end up getting the gravel roads parliament, and this is why we spend a bunch on roads. Again, we had saved a bunch on roads, and so now anything that is remotely in distance of Delhi gets a road, which means this entire scrum now has some measure of control. Not necessarily a lot, even like around this corner here, not necessarily a lot because we don't have a bunch of modifiers for this type of stuff, but we got roads all the way through to every single location basically in that area. At this point in time, we do get Renaissance in combat. Which is, again, this market down here. So things are spreading, and we've kind of hit this point where we're safe from being in this dead zone regarding tech. Delhi also has it, the Renaissance, so we weren't watching it too closely because we weren't necessarily that too focused on it. A little bit after this, we go on a 10,000 ducat build spree, just to kind of give references to like how much we're spending when we're spending this type of stuff. And we go for a declare in this scrum on this north central China area. I think that it's we just look to direct take land, and we take some of these. I think at this point we had taken Bamir, Johia, Godra, leaving a couple of these up here, which is kind of annoying because this is the line. This is the line to a silver. So in retrospect, I really wish that we kind of took out this guy way earlier than we did end up doing, because that way we would have a direct line to the silver in terms of being able to do a road, and that would have been pretty nice. But okay. This is the way things worked. That's the way the cookie crumbled. In 1426, we embrace meritocracy. And so we go for a lot of the good meritocracy texts, which there isn't like a huge amount of, but we research all of these faster because they are texts from a previous age. Meritocracy is an institution from the first stage coming in from China, and we get for that tax and trade efficiency, 2% tax efficiency, 2.5% trade efficiency. We have something like 30% tax efficiency, which is really nice. Reduced estate enrichment, which the estates withhold a small percentage of money that isn't eligible to be taxed, so the reduced estate enrichment effectively reduces that, or it gets rid of that, so you can tax the full amount in terms of the tax base that the estate has allocated to them, and a little bit of power projection and decreased stability costs. So that's what we go for. And we start to move our laws away from aristocracy. Remember, the aristocracy is having this value where we are increasing the number of nobles we have. As we know, this stimulates the economy because the number of buy orders that the nobles inject into the economy exceeds the amount of money they receive. However, we think, or I think, that we'll actually just generate more money on plutocracy anyways, because we have more max tax on the burghers, and we have tax efficiency, so every bit that we tax with 30% tax efficiency, that's going to be 30% free money. So the free money from the stimulus, I think, is just smaller, and so we'd rather have fewer nobles, because this will increase the tax proportion going to the burghers, and eventually be getting additional burghers, which will be nice as well. Also, a big portion of our expense is this expected cost of court. There's a 4% swing in here, and so I'm not sure if I think that it's better for the economy for every single run regarding switching from aristocracy to plutocracy, but with us having these additional modifiers towards the burghers, I do think it is going to start looking a lot more in that direction. Following this, we're kind of just talking through our spending, because we're kind of cruising at this point, just playing up and progressing. We get a 15k spend, and we start urbanizing and collapsing the price in other markets. I'm not sure exactly what market we are referring to here, because the Varansari market, we've already kind of collapsed prices. We might be collapsing prices in the Kambut and the Kambul markets, because these are two other markets we have control of, in which case this is going to allow us to build more stuff there, and that is going to be useful. In addition to that 15k spend on that, we are also in 1433 embracing banking. And we do that in a delayed way. We could have embraced banking quite some time before this, but we don't need the banking because we were researching the other texts out of meritocracy, but we really specifically, because the bonus you get doesn't scale with how many ages it is behind, we're in age 2, meritocracy is an age 1 tech. Before the second age ends, just in terms of how the math works, we want to research all the meritocracy texts we're ever going to want. So that's why we make sure we push all the meritocracy texts before researching the banking text, just to kind of be a little bit more efficient. But we do embrace banking, and for the text we go for increased trade range. This is really significant for us because we have really valuable resources and we lack the range to really push them anywhere. We have resources that we could very easily trade in other areas, like dyes, silks, cotton, all this type of stuff. Elephants, although elephants cost a lot more to move, so you can't really trade them that well. But we would love to trade these things, and the extra trade range is really good. After that is Counting House, which gives plus 33% crown power in locations, which, since the locations inform our actual crown power, and we have been urbanizing the locations that have high pops, we are going to be able to generate a lot more crown power as a result of this once we eventually do get up onto the counting houses. After that, we go for another trade range text, so plus 250 range, plus 250 range, and then following that, we do go for the Pound Lock Canal, which we have shown off here in terms of our research that we queue up ready to go. We kind of discussed it earlier, but we start to really push towns and cities on veins. So it's from Sagadwari, we go coal up here into Delhi. Oh, that's where Delhi is. We finally see it. Okay, so we're looking to push a vein to Delhi. We're looking to push a vein down along here, where we are going to put those Pound Lock canals and look to connect the market capitals to the actual capital, something like this. So this is where we're increasing urbanizing, and we're spending quite a bit on cities. Cities are generally a part of our big spends now, where if we're spending 15k, we might be upgrading 2 cities, which might cost 5k with the decreased prices. Looking here, we get the Dev Interior for our debate for Parliament, which Dev Interior is quite strong. That gives you minus 20% cost on all buildings in towns and cities, which is going to be more valuable if you have other discounts. We don't really have other discounts, so it's fine enough. We spend 16k, and at this point in time, our net income is 801, which is quite a bit bigger than before. We have 1805 185 in total revenue. From that, we are getting 162 from minting, 1750 from tax, 118 from trade, and that should be a really striking number if you followed the Venice run, because the Venice run, we were like between 30 and 60% the entire time in terms of what trade was getting relative to tax. Here, it's nowhere in the same sort of vicinity, and this is kind of a more normal looking ratio. But with trade, something that is important to note is that you're going to be effectively helping your tax income when you trade stuff. When you export away things that you're producing, you increase the price, which increases the tax base. And then when you import input goods, you decrease the input good, which improves the margin, which improves your tax base, because your tax base is based on the margin that buildings are producing. But also here, the 1750 is not quite that big, because I do think we are having parliament taxes at this point in time. We are also gaining 11 ducats from food, and we are gaining 34 ducats from dip. The dip is almost giving us nothing. If our subjects are loyal, we generate more revenue from them. They're not loyal at all, so we don't really get income. Also, the amount of diplo capacity it costs scales kind of with your income relative to theirs, so it creates interesting kind of death spirals that are possible, where you lose the loyalty of your subject, and then when they get disloyal, they pay you less, so you have less income, relative to them, and then they just spiral down kind of in terms of loyalty, and it can be a difficult one to dig your way out of. At this point, we have 9.7% Sunni. Remember, we said we had 6.7% Sunni some time ago, so in terms of where we've come, we have come up 3% or 50% in terms of the total number of Sunni pops that we have, but we, our most converted, locations are at something like in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% Sunni, and so eventually we're going to get cores at some point in time, but we're still pretty far off from getting anything. And then this is kind of at the end of the age, and around 1437 we choose admin focus as our next focus for the next age, and with that we get the reason we picked that is because there's a tech that gives plus 10 conversion, so we will go from 12 conversion with the madrasa. But a lot of locations we have are rural. The madrasa is only in urban locations. So the rural locations will go from 2 base conversion rate to 12, and then the madrasa locations will go from 12 to 20. And so that's quite a bit. There's also percentage conversion assimilation. We don't really care about the assimilation as much, although it will be useful. Another strong tech in there is minus 10% build cost. Another one is plus 25% trade capacity, really nice. Another one is plus 50% colonial migration. We're not colonizing yet, but we will colonize in East Africa as well as Australia eventually, and so that will be a pretty nice one, because colonial migration, a little bit hard to come by, kind of in various phases of the game. 50% is a good amount, so that's going to be nice. And another minus 10% urban build cost, and those two will stack together, so we'll start to have a bigger discount on urban buildings as we're building them, and we are going to start urbanizing a little bit more. At this juncture, we can embrace Renaissance, but we are just choosing not to, because we want it to cost less stability, and we have good researchable texts. We're still working on those ones we had set up from the banking tree. Although Renaissance does have some really good text, we don't want to eat a much bigger stab penalty because we are embracing an institution that isn't widely spread in our nation yet. As long as we have stuff to research, we can be a little bit slower with when we choose to embrace institutions. We did plan on only playing 100 years, but then we decided to play a little bit further than 1437, and so coming in, we have our trade range getting researched, and this adds a few more to the mix in terms of what we can trade with. We are now able to, we could trade with Hormuz and Adan before, but now we can trade with Mecca, and Baghdad is this light pink one. We are gaining extra places we could trade with, which is extra places we could dump goods to. This will also, by the way, accelerate the rate at which meritocracy gets pushed into the old world relative to before. It is also, we are also incurring some significant extra expenses as the age turns, because we get plus 10% additional cost of court from being a GP as it relates to our economic base, which means our eco slows down quite considerably at this point in time. So this is pretty substantive. Although we are still in really good shape, we are much worse than before. We unlocked the counting house, and before we put down a bunch of buildings, we are at a crown power of 20, which is pretty good at this point. We're not really running much of an efficiency malice, tax efficiency malice, and we have so many bonuses to tax efficiency. I think we're still at 32% tax efficiency with all of our bonuses, because we have 2% from meritocracy, we have 10% from the burghers, and then we have another 20% from our law that is tied to this nation specifically, as long as we stay Muslim. So this is going to be pretty good for us. We get a faster research of previous age tech, which for now also includes the banking and Renaissance tech. So now we're going to get a little bit of a catch-up mechanic helping us, which means that we're effectively not really behind, because we didn't really research any trash tech or have our research have to be stopped here in India. And again, just a point of emphasis, if you're playing China, I don't think you can avoid this. And so India doesn't really fall behind in the same way China does to some extent, and so China might miss out on some modifiers here and there, although still be able to be on the latest tech, just a little bit behind if the military institution has spawned in, ends up spawning in Europe or this type of thing. We go for let's see, Egypt, in 1438, spawns Pike and Shot. So we're going to get relatively early Pike and Shot, because that will spread to Mecca and then spread to us, because we can trade with Mecca. If we got just a little bit more trade range, we might even be able to trade with Egypt and kind of eliminate the middlemen, which would basically, for us, double the speed, or more than double the speed at which we could get Pike and Shot. So this would be really, really nice. And it's possible that we should do even something like a little bit cheesy, like moving the capital over here just a little bit from combat to here and annexing this area, right? Moving the market capital, just trying to get it within range. There's a certain breakpoint location with the techs available to us where this is the location where you can trade with Alexandria, right? And it's probably the case that you want to cheese having that exact location to get faster estates or something like this. And I think this is a fair enough way to do it. As Muscovy, we also had trouble with institutions. As Muscovy, you could just not take any locations and then just direct take locations later that have the institution and then embrace, was how we ended up handling it as them. So this is what we ended up going for. Also, with our nation, we have a little bit of a problem. And that problem is this. We have mostly Hindu pops, and they aren't really happy with us because we're Sunni, right? And so something that has been difficult for us is generating a lot of prosperity. We're still positive prosperity gain in almost all of our locations, but you can get up to minus 10% from your satisfaction, and we only have plus 10% from a privilege, so we're basically getting almost nothing. We decide to change a law to decentralize bureaucracy after researching bureaucracy in the banking tree. This gives us a point, I think it's 0.25 or 0.025, I forget exactly which, prosperity gain. So now all of our locations are going to go up in prosperity. Prosperity is really important. Let's see if we can find the tooltip for it. So the big part of what prosperity gives, we couldn't find the tooltip for it, but the big thing it gives is development. So it gives ticking development, and you can see at the top of development where we are gaining prosperity. This is the main source of development, so you need to get prosperity to 100, but also prosperity of 100 gives pop growth percentage, which is not necessarily super important for us at this juncture, playing as India, but this is an important modifier, and so that's why we do care about it and why we go decentralized bureaucracy specifically. This, of course, gives us decentralization, and this is one of the costs we pay in terms of our centralization budget, because you always want to have positive trend towards centralization. We are effectively paying for decentralized bureaucracy, like 0.2 worth of centralization trend, which is pretty substantive, because otherwise we would go centralized bureaucracy and gain progression towards bureaucracy. So this is a pretty big deal for us to be paying. We also note China's institutions, or has China embraced the institutions? They have gotten 0 institutions, basically. They have institutions like in the market capital, and that's it, I think, if anything. Korea has embraced professional army by the looks of it. In Sevilla, they spawned the New World, and printing press is spawned in Paris. Now, we are having difficulties. We are having significant difficulties with our subjects, which, again, we released a guy here, Malwa, and then down here, I don't remember the name of the subject, but we are having difficulty annexing Malwa, especially now with the additional GP costs. The additional costs of being a GP is making the cost of court too expensive, and we basically aren't making money at all. I think we might have even been negative, and the thing is we have a very significant expense in that our Diplo slider is maxed out. And it's even possible we just should not have paid for any dip whatsoever because of the sheer issues we are having with our subject loyalty, which I think is really driven by the fact that we have a lot of pops and our subjects have a lot of pops, and that relationship, since it increases both of our levy size, and that levy size is over-informing or is greatly informing our relative power level, that this really kind of hurts us in this exchange, whereas normally on a lower pop pair of nations, we would be able to just expand the army and lower the loyalty, or increase the loyalty that way. So it's really, really expensive. And so what we do is we take our Diplo slider to 0, and then we are plus 723 balance with Parliament. And so in terms of the total cost of the slider for Diplo, it is 435. And this is something a couple of people have said, you know, that they don't like the idea that the Diplo slider at 0 has basically no drawback, and that you can kind of just pull the slider to 0 and make a lot more money. If you're making really fat margins, you can have more subjects because you can pay into Diplo, but it's maybe not even the case that paying into Diplo like this way is that good. It is kind of how we've been playing, but I think that with the additional building costs, your margins get attacked in a way that it's maybe not worth it as much. I still do think you want to expand with subjects, just generally speaking, but there's probably a slightly different way to play it. But we are getting from subjects all the way down to only getting 5 ducats once we slide the slider all the way, but all the way to 0. But we were getting like 25 before, so this is a net for us like 510 income. What we do is we go from 24 Mamluk barracks, which again is our unique, or not, it's semi-unique, because we get Mamluk barracks, the Ottomans get their own type of barracks, it's like a Janissary barracks, and the Mamluks, of course, get the Mamluk barracks. But we go from having 24 of these bad boys to 50. We are determined to expand the army to try and increase the loyalty like we did with Venice, but it's not very effective for us. We also, in the eco, spam leather, weapons, guns, this type of thing, and we build 74 units, so we like more than double the size of our army. We also, during this time, deck on Hormuz, which is over here, because we want both the control of the strait, and also we want control over the market. Hormuz is right up here, but they actually have a navy and we don't have a navy, so we can't really take their capital. So that ends up not going too much of places. We do subjugate, I think, Macron over to the east slightly, and we get some locations off of them. It's probably fine. It's probably worth the war, but we can't take Hormuz proper until we get a fleet, which we don't have enough coastal locations to really make a fleet. And that's coastal locations specifically with high enough control that we get a lot out of a lot of sailors, because sailors scale with control. And so if we don't have a lot of control, we won't be able to get a lot of sailors. So that is a little bit of a vibe, but okay. We will need to declare another war for Hormuz. In that war, we did lose 14 units. I think we just kind of got careless and got stack wiped somewhere, which is fine, but we're at 60 units now, and the highest loyalty of our subjects is 8. And the big thing that is negatively scaling is a subject power relative to ours. And so we're like, why don't we just double our units? We're just going to double them. This was the idea behind building the Mamluk barracks, is we add another 60. At this point, our army maintenance, or I think after we finish this, our army maintenance is 32, and the Mamluk barracks maintenance cost is 21. So really, relative to the cost of the slider, this is 53. The cost of the slider was 435. So doing this is way cheaper on us. And I do believe half that is going towards the first 60 units that we had anyways. So really, this isn't a very expensive thing. But then we look at our loyalty only goes up to 10.3. And so this is when we realized that so much of this has to be coming from our levies, and maybe it has to do with the fact that our subjects upgraded their levies or something like this. I don't know exactly how that mechanic works, but the idea is we can't build our way out of it like we could with Venice in terms of adding military. Now, to be fair, as Venice, we didn't have access to the Mamluk barracks, which is nice, which would have given us the ability to really build out of it quite quickly and easily. We had to use our armories, which are much less effective, and we didn't have anywhere near as much pop as Delhi has, so we couldn't field anywhere near as big an army. But I think that just having these subjects that are really big is causing us, like, too much problems. And remember, this was part of our opening strategy, is releasing these subjects, and this is why I think that if we did it again, we would do it a little bit differently to try and avoid this subject pain at the end here. But I think the idea of releasing subjects is still good. But, okay, we basically get nowhere with that, and if we spend the full max slider, we'll go up to 36 loyalty. So the slider is giving us 26 for 435 investment, and for maybe 20 investment or 25 investment, we're getting 2 loyalty. So I don't know, we could do the math on that, but it actually doesn't seem like that bad a rate, but we can't really get enough people loyal. We could just max out the Mamluk barracks, I guess, and maybe try for it, but we have a different thing in mind. And so, okay, we embrace the Renaissance at this point in time, and we start going towards tech for +1 government reform, +1 cabinet member, then universities, and then a 10% crown power tech, and then Islamic Golden Age, which gives influence, which makes it cheaper to accept cultures, easier to convert cultures, this type of thing. And then we just kind of decide we've had enough, and we release this subject down there. Which is kind of roughly the equivalent of just letting Bahmani go through the event that we had at the beginning, through the disaster. When Bahmani declares for independence, if we just let them go, it's roughly a similar outcome. And once we release them, we're able to, with just 80 investment in Diplo, so 20% of the bar, we can annex Malwa above them. So it's possible that even just letting Bahmani go, just to begin with, is the correct way of approaching this, and getting your annexations started earlier. Now, to be fair, you're re-annexing people who you had integrated anyways, so it's not like an expand, but you're re-annexing them in a much healthier spot than you were before, and I think this does allow you to weather the storm, just in terms of our overall strategy, but in terms of execution, there's probably a way to execute this where you don't have to release Bahmani like this, or the equivalent of Bahmani, this entire southern area. And so I think that we probably could have approached it different, but also, we're just in a ridiculously, insanely good spot at this point in time, too. We are super rich, and it's 1437, and we haven't even really gotten the Age 2 tech stuff in yet, or just a really big development, and so we're going to be a lot stronger in the near-ish future, just coming on up from where we are, because we are now getting all the best techs, and we're getting them with the decreased research speed. The best techs from H2, we're getting them with the decreased research speed, and so this is going to develop quite strongly, and I don't think there's anyone in Europe who is remotely close to this strong 100 years in the game. Like, it's just not remotely, it's not even in the same neighborhood. And that is our detailed AAR for the Sultanate of Delhi. I don't know if we're going to do another detailed AAR, because I think the main idea here is we are trying to show particular beats and the gameplay in like a more detailed oriented way. But with 2 of these, some of the same patterns are going to get repeated, and these do it takes a long time to write everything down, and it's generally disruptive for the pace of play, such that we're playing way slower when we're kind of doing the research for these. But I did want to kind of talk about this. In particular, just kind of reflecting back, just in a more macro sense, the new coring requirements for religion just super negatively affect Delhi. Just to be clear, we only start with like an oval here in terms of cores. Everything else is integrated. So it's not the case that everything is a core for us, and we can't make things cores. And this is a really significant disadvantage that is going to take a little bit of time to scale out of, but I still think we scale out of this. But I also think that the way this coring works is probably going to be changed, because it makes it such that doing tolerant societies just doesn't make sense. You have to convert everyone if you can't core. Like, the Ottomans can't core as they expand into anything that is Christian, and even despite the fact that they like have tolerance, and also going for tolerance rather than conversion doesn't make sense in an environment where you can't core people. And then also, if you are a really loud car outside, then you got to go vroom vroom. But also, if like the Reformation is going to be like a weird situation, if I know your coin can get bricked. I don't know if it can get bricked by your flipping the wrong religion. I don't think it can, because otherwise we would have lost all of our cores as Delhi. But when you go through the Reformation and suddenly everything flips, it's going to be like weird or hard to core areas that probably shouldn't be hard to core, you know? If you're Protestant and you're moving in on Catholic locations, you suddenly have to core, you have to flip all. Maybe it does make some sense. I definitely think religion should inform it, but it really is a huge factor for Delhi, because we would have been able to have a lot better economics if we had gotten cores and be able to push a lot of things a lot better and have a lot more control of these types of things, just in terms of what we had access to. So that is definitely a really big feature. The fact that you have an enormous population is also an enormous feature. This is just a huge thing. Like, there's 50 million pops, 50 to 80 million pops in India. There's 50 to 80 million pops in China. They're roughly equivalent. And specifically, another really big factor here is just the way you handle institutions and the spread of institutions. And I think that this is kind of the far zone. I think you can spread institutions kind of to Ethiopia, to Mali, to Novgorod / Muscovy, just in terms of the locations that are as far away from Europe as possible, relatively well. But anything outside of that, you're going to fall behind in tech in a way that is like rough to recover from, because you don't get increasing bonuses towards researching old texts. And I think you'll just kind of be stuck with 50 to 100 or like 50 to 80 years as China of not researching good text. I guess I have to try it and see what we can do in terms of pulling the research, and maybe there's some cheese that you end up doing if you're playing further east. But you really have this conflicts of the pops, the ability to get institutions. Eventually you can convert people to Sunni, even in the current environment, especially once you get a lot of the Reformation texts. And the Reformation, I think, increases research speed, the age. And so I think in the Reformation, eventually you just do actually start converting enough to make this happen. And then also is the bonuses. The 10% max tax for burgers and 20% tax efficiency, and you're formable having decreased proximity cost. I think you have decreased proximity cost, you have access to the Mamluk barracks, and you have access to the Muslim tech tree. And so all of this together, I do think Delhi is extraordinarily strong. It just has a really rough start. Venice also really had a rough start, so maybe a little bit interesting to go through. But at this point, I'm going to kind of be rambling on, so I think we're going to conclude this here. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. If you wanted to support the channel, go honk honk with the loud car outside. But also, if you're going to pre-order the game, order it off of the official website with my code generalist in all caps. That's of course if you want to support, but check online if it is cheaper before you do that, because sometimes based on certain localizations it could be cheaper on Steam versus online, or vice versa, and so that is worth checking. But other than all that, I hope you guys have a good one, and yeah.